but I think the bigger picture of it is, boy, you can see where that's going to be abused, and that's going to affect free speech pretty negatively if the wrong people, and I say the wrong people, in my opinion, the wrong people start making decisions around that. And so this could definitely be consequential to freedom of speech aligned to our faith on social media.
Welcome to the Digital Ministry Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Runyon, and the Digital Ministry Podcast is brought to you by Media Impact International. And I'm happy to welcome back longtime Digital Ministry Podcast guest, fan of the show, Nils Smith. Nils, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be back, and a big fan of the show and a big fan of Nick Runyon. And so it is always fun to chat, and I'm excited about today's conversation.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks. That's hopefully our listeners will be as well. We're gonna kind of wade into some deep water today. Yes. There's some interesting things that are happening politically in the U.S. right now. You want to make any comments on the Trump-Biden debate? Should we just?
We're going to go right into the deep end. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this conversation that people are watching, obviously, what's happening in U.S. politics, and but it trickles out, everywhere in the world of how some of the rulings that happen, some of the political fallout that happens, and yeah, we are in an interesting day and time around technology and social media. I think, Nick, I was thinking back with the debate that just happened, is the U.S. politics was most dramatically affected during the Obama election when he leaned into that new social network that was a joke, Facebook, and that was in what many people claim led to his presidency.
Yeah,
and I think that's when Facebook was really taken seriously as a marketing platform, and so we're seeing all chaos taking place here in the U.S. right now in our presidential election. And this is the beauty of social media, because it's all historically, a lot of this probably happened in the past. We just never knew about it because it was all controlled by mass media. But now social media allows us, this is now a public conversation that we're all a part of and getting to watch and hear all kinds of people from all different angles speak into it. And so it is a fascinating day. And I think, this conversation today is going to speak into what, where some of this free speech might be going as well, tied to some of these conversations. And I think it scares a lot of people on both sides of this conversation of what can happen and will happen.
One of the things that I think is essential by the way, one of my goals for today's show is to get flagged or, censored by YouTube or something. So just so you know, okay. That's where we're going.
Good objective.
There were tons of case studies written about that Obama campaign that you mentioned. Yeah. Which are fascinating. Like, I was reading them as soon as they were written, years ago, trying to understand that. Have you bumped up against, this isn't what we're going to talk about, but I'm just curious, like, have you participated in any kind of political social media efforts? I mean, like, in an official capacity, like, have you ever run campaigns or talked to anybody, firsthand that's been doing some of that stuff since then?
The answer is yes. Yeah. And the answer is also, I can't talk about it.
Yeah. Same.
And so, I have, and it was one of the most exhilarating and chaotic times of my professional, career.
Yeah.
And it, I think too, people underestimate, how smart some of these political campaigns are, but the depth of strategy tied to these campaigns and the real-time nature of them, it was getting a front row seat for that experience. And I've only really done it once formally it was something else. And so I think too, this is where I also believe, because it was somewhat early in these days, there wasn't enough regulation, and the amount of targeting, capabilities in that season was just, is pretty wild. And honestly, too much, like I look, even at the time, I was like, I can't believe we can do this, but it's like, you'd be silly not to do it, aligned to your objectives. And so I do think a lot of the things that have developed, especially on the social media sides, the way they've kind of self-governed themselves, has been wise, because I have definitely been a part of, I wouldn't say abusing data, but maximizing all the data that they give me access to, because they give me access to it. And it's, I think the way they've pulled back is healthy for sure. But yeah, it's crazy. I'm curious your experience, knowing you also can't talk about it too much, but what your experience in that space was.
I've done some work on both sides, like Republicans and Democrats, so for anybody who's listening, trying to like pigeonhole, like, oh, I bet they're, in that camp or whatever. Not necessarily. Like, so when I saw, some of the tools, let's talk about Facebook. When I saw some of the targeting tools and capabilities that were available, I mean, down to the individual user's device level.
Yes.
I started investing in Facebook like years ago. I was like, I've never seen anything like this. They're going to make billions of dollars. And so I started buying stock, and I did really well with it. Like I'm all out of Facebook now, but, that kind of led to some personal, like financial decisions, in my family. Cause I was like, this is incredible. Like you can put anything you want in front of anybody that you want to. And so I think people still today in 2024 don't realize that like the stuff that you're seeing is not being seen by accident. It is, some of it's algorithmically driven. Some of it's very intentional. Like you fit a certain profile or whatever. And that's, whatever your markers are is why you're seeing the content that you're seeing. I was reading this morning about browser fingerprinting. If you or anybody listening doesn't know what browser fingerprinting is, if you think your incognito mode, your private browser mode, denying cookies, and I'm like, I don't want to give my information away. Like that is, I will say that's, I'm pretty like, leave me alone, and I want to do my own thing without, you tracking me. That's my position on a lot of stuff, kind of because I've seen what's possible and what's available. But like, browser fingerprinting it was a new concept to me, where it's basically code that is recognizing like your screen resolution, your IP address, your, some of the normal stuff, but some like really specific markers. They still don't know that I'm Nick necessarily, but they know that I'm this user and this is my digital footprint. And so like the patterns that this individual user has can be kind of known, targeted. There's a lot of information that you can pull just by watching what people do online. So like, it's all being watched. All the content that you get is being served to you 100%. On purpose.
Yes.
And when it comes to like politics, a free and like a free press is incredibly important for democracy.
Yep.
And I think that over the last 5-6 years, people are really kind of waking up to this idea that your mainstream media, obviously it's completely biased, but more than that, there's talking points, like all of it's manufactured, which puts an even brighter spotlight onto social media platforms, both the individual voices, but then also the ones that are kind of paid or engineered to provide a certain message, and so that's kind of the context, like to set up this conversation today. What you and I were talking about earlier was this Supreme Court ruling. So I'm just going
Well, Nick, I want to just add in. I'm curious because as you're talking about that, I'm reminded. Have you ever been to the Newseum? And it's not there anymore, but in DC, the museum that was all about the news development.
No,
it was one of my favorite.
I've
museums.
never heard of this.
It was such a cool museum, but it walked through essentially the history of how news was generated, distributed, and even looked at closed countries versus open countries. And it talked about one of the things that was so fascinating to me as a, digital, marketer, is the power of Twitter. When Twitter came around, it really changed news, in according to, I think to how I perceived the museum to tell the story as significantly as the newspaper. The newspaper became that daily news cycle, where Twitter turned it from a daily news cycle to a real-time news system, and structure. And Twitter really has, historically, and I think we saw this from the Arab Spring, years back, and we've seen it through so many different political cycles and events and world events of if something is happening in the world and you get any buzz about it, the first place you typically go is X now, or Twitter. Yeah. And it really has been, I think people, because it doesn't have the same eyeballs and attention that Facebook, Instagram, YouTube have, I think people, devalue it. But when it comes to news and information, I still don't think there's a more significant and important platform on the internet than Twitter or X that really has been established. And so, I think that's a big part of this conversation, and how that has come about in the last, 2 decades.
I think that's a great comment. I mean, if I read pretty much every day, I read New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. I actually have really fallen in love with the Financial Times recently. And these are paid subscriptions that I pay for, and I think it's worth it, And when something gets published on one of those sites, they're all pretty reputable. It's still going through an editorial process. And so like if I see, a particular article that I really like, I always go find the author, the reporter, and I follow them on X. And like I'll put them into a certain list that, that I like to curate or whatever. But because it's the unedited version from the reporter on the ground. And so it's really an opportunity to tap into an unvarnished, unedited point of view from somebody who's doing like the hard work to bring that story to light. I think that's incredibly important and valuable, no matter kind of where you land on the political spectrum or on any issue. It's, gathering information from the source, like going to the root source. In this case, this example, the reporter. It's really valuable. And it's a good check. It's a check and balance against really kind of mainstream media. So that's one of the amazing benefits of the internet. And I hope that people, especially through our next election cycle, that they will take the time and initiative to find information for themselves, and try as much as possible to balance that out, like avoid, the echo chamber, which was a big buzzword several years ago. But, okay. So what does all this have to do with digital ministry? Here's the connection. I'm looking at scotusblog.com. This was an article posted on June 26th. The title, we'll link it in the show notes here, but the headline is Justices Side with Biden Over Government's Influence on Social Media Content Moderation. Okay, social media content moderation. So what is this issue about? So on Wednesday last week, the Supreme Court ruled, they threw out a lawsuit that was seeking to limit the government's ability to communicate with social media companies about their content moderation policies. And they go on to provide a ton of good information in here, but the Supreme Court justices are citing instances in the past that have now become public where the government's making phone calls to people at Facebook and they're saying like, you got to limit this person, or, famously, and this is, I think, a big motivator for Elon purchasing Twitter and then rebranding it to X, was taking like Trump offline. I really don't care like where you land on somebody's politics. The action of a platform like that censoring an individual because they don't like or they don't agree with what they're saying.
Right.
That's kind of the issue at case here. So the Supreme Court ruled that lawsuit would be thrown out. So the people were trying to limit the government's ability to influence social media content moderation, and that case got dismissed. So said a different way is, those instances of the government or somebody calling and pressuring a platform owner to censor or moderate content will likely continue and can continue.
Yep.
From a legal perspective. So what's that mean? What's that mean for ministries that are using these platforms in order to promote a message that some people may not agree with or believe in?
Right. And I think that's the question, Nick, is if this is where it starts, I think what we have learned through history is that this isn't where this ends, that this ruling is going to carry over into other areas, essentially the government in this, instance is going to dictate what can and can't be said about other issues, not just politically motivated issues, but more specifically religious issues. And I think we have seen, faith issues labeled hate speech, or we have seen, faith messages, suppressed in different ways historically, whether in the United States or in other places. And so, what does this mean in 5-10 years, as this expands out? But what it tells us in the US, and I think what other countries have already experienced, is that the government is not limiting their ability to be able to dictate what's able to be heard and not heard on these platforms. And, I'll tell you my opinion directly is I'm not a fan of that. I feel like my opinion is that's government overreach. And I'm not comfortable with where I believe this could lead. There's a side of me understands why they need that and want that. But I think the bigger picture of it is, boy, you can see where that's going to be abused, and that's going to affect free speech pretty negatively if the wrong people, and I say the wrong people, in my opinion, the wrong people start making decisions around that. And so this could definitely be consequential to freedom of speech aligned to our faith on social media. And so I have concerns. I don't know, where this goes from here, but my initial response is concerned that this is the direction things are going. Nick, I'm curious your hot take as this is kind of fresh news.
Well, I think you have to think about like who owns these platforms. So the ruling does, like in the statement that was released, they talk about pressure and influence, not necessarily decision making and action. Yeah. But they also cite several examples where Facebook rolled over, and they said, okay, we'll do what you want. Yep. And we've seen this with, Google and how they've interacted with the Chinese government, so like there's a different Google experience in China, in mainland China than outside. So I think you have to ask, who owns these platforms?
Yep.
What's the motivation? What are they trying to accomplish? And is it a public forum? So like this is a First Amendment issue in the US, the
Yep.
right to free speech.
Yep.
I would probably align with you on, not liking this and not liking the government influence. But at the same time, I'm also recognizing that like the internet, I think is largely considered a public utility.
Yep.
And it's also available to everybody.
Yes.
So like I might not be able to put whatever message I want out on Facebook or X. Yep. I might not be queried or what's like listed by Google. I might get delisted. Yep. I don't show up in search results because a company owns that website and that experience, and they're going to make decisions, ideally in the best interest of that company and its shareholders.
Yes.
But then again, like it all comes back to the money side of things. Like there are shareholder demands that are at play here. Yes. So, if I start to think about like taking an offensive posture, like what does that mean? So does that mean that I'm just unable to use digital tools in order to, promote my ministry or connect with people? It likely means that some of those tools might not be available in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that most ministries or even like businesses are thinking about that. Yeah. I don't think there's plans in place to hedge against that.
Yep.
And we've seen this before, like when back to Google, when they released, I think it was the Panda update years ago.
Okay.
And businesses just crumbled because they're like, I don't show up in listings anymore, and like an e-commerce business just went from, revenue to zero overnight.
Yes.
With the change of a search algorithm.
Well, and I think Nick, this is where, it's important to just even remember not just who owns these platforms, but what we own on these platforms. And it's essentially nothing. Right. We talk about social media being rented property, and we are using their platform that we don't pay for. Typically, we might pay $15 a month for, something, or we pay for ads on it, but we have an objective for where we spend money. But generally when we put content out there, we're hoping the algorithm reaches people. It's almost as if they have the newspaper and it just was a bunch of blank sheets and we can all write all over the newspaper, and then they're going to distribute it for us. And whoever's writes with the biggest font is going to get the, the most attention. And there's times where we have seen breakout organically and free on social media. And then there's times where we've seen algorithms suppressed and things changed and accounts shut down. But the reality is we'll never, no matter what the government, I think comes to here, with these social media platforms, unless we build our own social network, we don't own it. We are on rented property. And so we're either under the control of the owners of the property or the government who, can maybe dictate things to the controllers of it. But regardless, we're not the owners of it. And so I think we have to have clear understanding and expectations that when our accounts do get shut down and when things happen, and I am a proponent of social media and maximizing the opportunity, but I'm also, I think you've got to go into it with realistic understanding and expectation of the potential fallout of what can happen. And we even talk about often that this is why things like email are so important, and your website and different things. But at the end of the day, even your email, if it gets suppressed by Gmail into the junk mail box, it might as well be, blacklisted in the algorithms on social media. And so there are a lot of challenges in digital communications to these big tech players that we just have to, I think, have our eyes wide open as we're utilizing these tools. And the reality is, whatever it is today, it's going to be different tomorrow. These platforms are always changing. The policies are changing. The technology is changing. The algorithms are changing. And so we can't get comfortable. But I think we have to continue to lean into the opportunity, but it's never going to stay the same.
Yeah, never stays the same. I mean, you use the word rented space. I mean, have you ever rented an apartment where pets aren't allowed?
Yeah.
What if the landlord shows up and you have a dog? Like, you get kicked out.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. So,
and your dog might not have been doing anything wrong, or but at the end of the day, that was their right as the owner to kick you out.
Yeah. They own it. They own the building.
Yeah.
They can do what they want with it. So, I mean, what would your advice be? The sky's not falling today.
Yes. Yep.
It might not in the future, but it may. So like, how should a team kind of navigate this environment? What should they be, first of all, thinking about, but then like, what action do you take?
Yeah, well, very carefully is the answer. I don't know. I was actually listening to a Gary V interview this morning, and he was talking about, he believes TikTok is going to get shut down in the United States. And he said, well, the people that were interviewing him, asking him, where's all that attention going to go? And he said, this is something we've actually never really dealt with. Is, we're talking about the average American spends over an hour a day on TikTok. And if it just shuts down, one day, that hour of attention is going somewhere. And so is it going to YouTube? Is it going to Instagram? Is it going, and his big guess is that X is going to bring back Vine, and that's going to be their opportunity to catch a bunch of new attention. But I think the answer to your question, Nick, is we've got to lean in intentionally, understanding where are the people we want to reach and engage. How can we best engage them there? And how can we move them to a place where if we lose engagement with them here, we don't lose connection with them relationally? And so this is where I think diversification is important. Maybe that's getting them into a WhatsApp list. Maybe that's, getting them onto an email list or different places of engagement with them. And then it's also just being flexible and adaptable to, my early days of digital ministry was on MySpace. Like if I just stayed there and just said, like, it's no fair that everybody's leaving MySpace for Facebook. I like my, 20,000 friends on MySpace. You would have gotten left behind. And I think people got frustrated when Facebook's algorithm changed and their organic engagement dropped. But that's the way these platforms work. That's what happens. And so it's going to keep changing. And I think we have to remain flexible and adaptable. And that when we do that, it gives us the opportunity to jump on trends, to jump on opportunities, but they don't last. I mean, I believe the biggest opportunity for most ministries right now is YouTube. I think YouTube globally is where more and more attention, just over the last 15 years, when you look at their just growth trajectory, it's the most steady growth trajectory in the social media landscape, where Facebook grew and flatlined. Instagram has kind of grown and leveled out. TikTok exploded and now has since flatlined. But YouTube has just continued to grow and grow and grow. But at the end of the day, that could change too. We really don't know what's going to happen with these spaces. And that's where I think we've got to be diversified and thoughtfully. We can't be everywhere and over diversify to where we're not maximizing the opportunities on the key platforms. But I think we have to be ready though at any point of like, if I think you got to look at every platform you're on. And if our Facebook page got shut down, what does that do to us? If our Instagram account got shut down, what does that do to us? If just thinking through the what ifs are important for every ministry as they approach the digital ecosystem.
Yeah, that's good.
What do you think? What's your what historically, because you've been in the space for a long time too, and you've experienced the ups and downs. How have you seen ministries navigate the changing landscapes effectively, and how would you, somebody today that's listening, how would you advise them?
I think the best teams are the ones that are consistently in a mindset of learning. I think if you approach all of this from like, what is new today? What do I need to learn today? Which is really hard. Like, it's really exhausting. I did an episode, on this podcast a couple episodes ago, just about like, how do you start a new like how do you build a team from scratch?
Yeah.
You can go out
Yep.
and you can pay big money for people with experience. But what I've found is like those experienced marketers, they got lazy because they had some
Yep.
wins. They've maybe taken a director title, and you really have to kind of stay in the nuts and bolts of social media, like content creation, promotion, marketing, trends, that are intersecting with all of those things. I mean, like on a daily basis, and it is exhausting.
Yes.
But the teams that have figured out how to do that consistently over time are the ones that always come out on top because nothing is stable. Like it's always changing, like you're saying. So, I think I even shared this story. That's how I got my first marketing job. I kind of talked my CEO into this idea that like, I don't have to know more. I don't have to have 10 years of experience. All I have to do is apply what's happening today. So if I learn and apply it faster than our competition, we will win. Yep. And I still believe that's true. Yep. 20 years later, that's still true. And so I think teams need to think about like, what's my daily news feed? Like, am I dedicating time to not just creating new ads today, but like, am I dedicating any time to thinking time, like strategy development? Is there within my office or within my, dispersed teams, is there some way that we're sharing, news and trends with one another? Are we having this conversation, within our teams to talk about like what's changing? What's the implication? What do we do about it? How, how should we hedge against this?
What Nick, you talk about, I mean, and I think at the end of the day, if somebody's listening to this, it tells me they're looking to go somewhere to learn, and they're choosing this podcast as one of those places. It's a question I get a lot, but I'm curious for you. And you mentioned where you go to read, in those subscriptions you have. Where else would you recommend people go to do that research, especially in the area of digital ministry?
I don't want to give all my secrets away, but no. Yeah. Oh, so I mentioned like some, mainstream news outlets. I'll tell you what's not on it is anything on television. Like I don't spend any time I'll watch like CNBC on the plane if I've watched all the movies, just because I'm kind of interested in like the business aspect of it.
Yeah. Honestly, I get the best clips from TV that they pull out of their content on YouTube.
Right.
And so you could save a lot of time instead of watching all the fluff. Like let them just watch their 5-minute video that they post on YouTube, and that's going to give you the best content off of that platform and save you a lot of time.
Some places that I found a lot of value are like specific Facebook groups and often, and I would say WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups, like small, I mean, relatively small. We're talking sometimes there's thousands of people in there, but it's not like, millions of people. Small groups of like practitioners, like people that are doing the work, not just talking about it, but like actually doing the work and sharing. The best groups are ones where people are sharing examples like, hey, I ran this and it failed. Like, what do you guys see that I don't see? That's huge. Those are so Reddit is a place where Reddit gets a little noisy, but
I think though, what I'm hearing, Nick, and it's actually helping to clarify it for myself, is you kind of have the mass media place that you get knowledge from articles and some things like that. Then you have your kind of community place that might be hundreds or dozens that are in your and so Telegram is actually where I've started, having more of these cohorts, which is interesting. But I would say it had, especially as I got into crypto more, was Discord is where I was in a lot of that kind of community. And historically Facebook groups has been that place. But I would say then we most of us have kind of our core 3 to 5 people that we just know. And this is like, you're in that circle for me, Nick, of like, what are you learning right now?
Right.
What are you, like, what are you tinkering with? And like, and it being intentional though, to have those conversations. Kenny Jang is another guy that's been on this podcast that is in that circle for me, where I'm intentional to at least once a month get some time to hear what he's learning, and he's asking me the same things. And so that's how I think you kind of have these buckets of where are you learning? But I think to your bigger point here, the organizations and ministries that thrive through seasons like this have leaders that are learners and have that intentionality. And that takes time. It takes time to read those articles. It takes time to be in those groups and engage in those groups. It takes time to have those calls and conversations with those core people. It doesn't happen. You don't run into new information. Right. You have to look for it and pry it out of people.
Well, that's, you're saying that. And one of the best sources of some of these online communities that I'm talking about have come through like real life relationships. It's like, hey, I'm in this group that my buddy invited me into and you should join it too. They're not published. They're not publicized. You kind of have to, do the legwork. And who do you admire? Who is in a similar space that's doing good work? Reach out and, start a conversation. I've done that so many times. And with the exception of reporters never reply. But I've reached out on Twitter. I've sent emails, like cold phone calls. Yep. It's like, hey, you're doing something. I've followed you for a long time. I love your stuff. Yep. Can we have a conversation about it? And then you just, build a relationship. What are you learning from there? I think one of my most fun examples of that is a guy named Dan Heath who wrote the book Made to Stick. Okay. And him and his brother Chip have lots of great books. He's got a new one coming out later this year. But, we connected. He came on and did a webinar for our company at my last company that I was at. But we've continued to just bounce ideas off of one another, because he's evaluating he's building case studies on companies that are doing really great product development in a good way. I was like, what are you, what are you learning? And then he's asking me how would you promote this stuff? So it's a fun conversation. And then out of that is where some of those best leads come from, is what I've found.
That's good. It's good. When I don't know, it has, it is far from the same alignment as this podcast, but I will say, and you and I have talked about this other podcast at times, but the All In podcast has become one of my go-to places. And so I want to be clear, there's probably plenty of disalignment with that podcast and this one, but they're collective of technology entrepreneurs that have really interesting insights into where technology is going, where culture is going, where politics are going, where business is going. And it's been a really insightful place for me. And then it's also given you and I opportunity to then have conversations around, what did you think of this? And I think that having that collective learning, those learning opportunities and places you go to learn. And I think it's the beauty of a podcast like this is, hopefully there are leaders that are then gathering after they listen to a podcast like this to then discuss this topic within their circles and how this might affect their ministry. And I think that's the purpose of content like this, not to be consumed by the individual, but to hopefully to be consumed and starting a conversation, among other leaders that can navigate, these points of impact on their ministry and apply it directly to their context.
I think one of the things that I've seen, the people that do this best, I think tend to be in small organizations because they know that they have to go outside in order to get new information. Hear something different. But within even the largest ministries and organizations, there's usually, and as I say this, if you're in one of those, you'll probably have somebody come to mind that matches this. But there's usually a thought leader within your larger organization who has built this network of people from the outside, and then they're bringing that information back and they're sharing it with their teams. Which I think I made a joke earlier, about I don't want to give my secrets away. But that's a joke. Give the secrets away. It doesn't matter. And I'll tell you why it doesn't matter. You should be running faster than, let's just say, your competition's ability to hear what you're doing and apply it. I've made that challenge to marketing teams in the past. It's we can talk about anything that we're doing. It's not proprietary. Like we might have hacked something together or figured out like some edge somewhere where we're getting an advantage.
Yep.
But like, you can't sit on that. You got to go find the next one. And so you should be free to talk about it and start the conversations around whatever you're doing well today to build trust. Cause then it's going to help lead to the next insight. So don't be greedy. Don't be selfish with it. Share it and give it away.
That's so good. That's so good. I think when I think about how many, and this takes me back to conversations I had 8 years ago when the Facebook algorithm just like overnight shifted, and people, ministries that I worked with that were, had millions of followers on Facebook and were seeing 10% of their followers see their content, with every post. And then that dropped to like 3% overnight, and then to 1%, eventually. And they were just like, well, what do we do now? And it's like, who do we call at Facebook is what they're asking me. How do we fix this at Facebook? And it's like, you're not going to fix this. No. You don't own that. You've got to move on, and you either just take 3% and be happy with that, or 5% or whatever, whatever it was. But at the time we were seeing more like 15% on Instagram because it was a different place, and you might only have 20,000 followers there versus the million you have here. But you've got to adapt and be paying attention, rather than just complaining when your cheese got moved. And and there's times where
it's a good book reference, by the way.
It's across the board. Yeah, it is a great book. But it's, I think it is such a great leadership lesson for a situation like this, going back to the original article in news event, is that when we see this, I think there are two leadership postures that we can take of one, like, I don't like it, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to complain about it, I'm going to be disturbed by it, or I'm going to adapt to it, and I'm going to even look for opportunity within it.
Right. There's always opportunity within it.
There's always opportunity. And sometimes it will mean that your current impact is diminished, because that's going to happen with every ministry, every business, anything you're doing is going to, you're not always going to be up and to the right. But it's like, okay, we just got knocked down. And so how do we get back up? And it's not a switch you're going to flip and get back to where you were, but likely when you do it rapid enough and wise enough, you could see soaring well beyond. And so these are leadership, it's a leadership lesson more than anything, rather than a practical, you just need to do this and this and this to protect yourself. In many ways, I don't think there is protection from these things. I think there's just leadership adaptation that we have to learn, because this is moving quickly. And as we get into AI and all these other things, the speed of all of this is about to get a lot faster. Yeah. And so if we're not adapting well now to these kind of changes, the things that are coming, we're going to get left behind really quickly. Sure. And so adaptation is going to be more important than ever for leaders into the future.
Yeah. So, sounds like two big takeaways from this conversation. The first would be, it's a shifting landscape. You got to learn you got to learn quickly and apply quickly in order to kind of keep pace, really.
Yep.
But then the second, I think, actionable takeaway for people is you have to think about, how do you build your audience on your own owned properties?
Yes.
How do I build an email list, build a, list of phone numbers? Go all the way back. Do I have addresses for people? This would be kind of doomsday kind of thing, but can I send letters? Is the postal service still going to deliver my newsletter if I print it out? And, but that's a little extreme. How do you shift people from some of these rented platforms that we're all kind of taking up space on in order to something that you've got more control of? That's really good, Nils. Always great insights from you. I think that I've just got kind of one more question before I let you go.
Yeah.
And who are you going to vote for this fall?
Well, that is a great question, and I think one of the fascinating parts of that question is, as of right now, we don't even know who's going to be on the ballot.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so
this is crazy.
So this is this is
good answer, by the way.
Unprecedented in this moment. And so as of right now, I can confidently say I have no idea who I'm going to vote for. And at this point in any past presidential cycle, now my mind has changed in the past, but I would have pretty confidently been able to tell you who I'm going to vote for. But Nick, I'm going to turn it on you. Who are you going to vote for?
No, I was just making a joke. But seriously, I'm with you. I'm really weighing some of these larger issues and thinking about, my wife and I this morning were having a conversation about the Constitution versus individual parties.
Yeah.
Like I still have a lot of faith in the Constitution of the United States and the checks and balances that are in place. And I think that there's a lot of media, there's a lot of people that want to like drum up a bunch of fear about, it's crumbling and the experiment is over. And, maybe we'll see. Yes. But it's not yet over. And those checks and balances are still in place. And then you add in the element of individual voices that can, find an audience on some of these platforms like we're talking about and really provide a point of view that's not getting the airtime, on your mainstream media. Like I love, it's terrifying, but I also kind of love that that's the world that we live in right now. Yeah. So, because anybody with a microphone can, put whatever view they have, they can put it out there, and then you let the people choose.
I think this is a valuable part of this conversation, because I believe the most powerful platform in American politics today is the Joe Rogan podcast.
That's that single one. I was going to say podcast as a platform, but
no, I'm going to say Joe Rogan's podcast. Wow. And he has basically, everybody's tried to get him to get Trump on there. Yeah. But he has, which is so crazy because he's a nut. And he does this like 3-hour podcast. And,
it's hard to listen to. I don't know if I've ever finished one, actually. So
there's been a couple that I've listened to. Elon Musk on there was one of them. And I think when Zuck was on there, and Mr. Beast. There's a few that I've listened all the way through, but they're so long. But this person with a microphone in like a little side room of his house has one of the most powerful platforms for American politics. What a day that we're in, and he can't be controlled by mass media. Now I might be exaggerating that, but I think that if, Biden or Trump go on that podcast, it's going to explode. And that will be the most listened to media outlet that either one of them could get on today. And I think it just speaks to the day that we're living in, for good and bad, and I'm with you of just, at the end of the day, and I live in New York City, which is perfectly imperfect, and we love our city, and it's unbelievably complicated, and our politics are messy. But I'm so grateful to be here. And as an American, I think our politics are messy and crazy, but I'm grateful, for the freedoms that we have and the opportunities that we get. And it's, I don't know how this is all going to play out, but it's a wild day, but it's going to be okay. Yeah. That's kind of my perspective. And we do have, I believe, a pretty great Constitution that I'm excited to see where things go from here. I'm not excited. I'm concerned, but I'm curious where things go from here. But I'm also not that concerned where I'm not moving, and it's going to be okay. And we'll navigate wherever things go.
I do think that podcast as a platform is going to be a material factor in this upcoming election, in the same way that social media was with the Obama campaign that you talked about.
Yep. Yep.
And I assume that our listeners are, listening to other podcasts. Like, congratulations. I think you guys are in the right space, like choosing, where you're going to get your information and help make informed decisions. But like, I tell people that all the time. It's like, you got to listen to, and here's a whole list of podcasts that cover the spectrum, like I'm not like promoting one over the other. Just this long format is so interesting when it comes to politics. And I'll leave everybody with this. Like, I also get really sick of like the political conversation. It's like a lot of tongue wagging that results in very little. But I think we had an interesting ruling last week that has some real implications for those that are in digital ministry that might be listening to this.
Agreed.
So, hey, thanks, Nils, for taking some time to just chat through that, and great perspectives as always.
Yeah.
So
thanks for having me.